He was held in Brixton Prison. He was seen by the medical officer. He was declared to be completely sane. He was examined by the psychiatrist, who found no evidence of any mental disorder or any kind of disease. He didn't have any injuries or illness of any kind of significance. He had no history of memory loss. He had no history of any kind of sleep disorder, of sleepwalking, of depression, of any of these things. He was an unusually deep sleeper, and he was a very heavy drinker quite regularly. And there were times when he was so drunk that he was told afterwards that he'd been telling jokes and couldn't remember them. He was given an electroencephalogram. The result was normal and stable. Now, just jumping forward in time, some of you may remember a case, it was only a couple of years ago, when a man was accused of murdering his wife, which had happened while he was asleep. But that was a completely different situation. That man had a pre-existing known sleep disorder for which he was taking medication. The couple were on holiday. He decided not to take his medication. It had an unfortunate side effect. He was taking it, it made him impotent. So he decided to stop taking the medication, and in fact, being off medication, in his sleep he did murder his wife. But that was a case completely different from that because there was a known disorder. Boches had no known disorder. Well, the trial opened in February 1961. Boches was caught with his uniform, all his medals, and pleaded not guilty. And his wife came down from Scotland, and she stood by him. Francis Camps, the expert, was asked if he thought it was possible that Boches could have strangled a woman while he was asleep. He didn't think so, because you're strangling someone, they're going to thrash about, isn't that going to wake you up? It seems likely. He thought it was very improbable. Boches said, he was very good in the witness box, he said he really didn't know how Jean had died. He said, there was no quarrel or argument, I'm reading here. At no time did I make any overtures of sexual relations to her, nor did I have any desire to kill her or harm her in any way. The prosecution in the final address to the jury made a very simple version of what he thought had happened. He said, she cried and she was heard, and he silenced her, and she died. But the defence said there was no motive for the murder, and it was accidental. Now, what was the jury going to do in this case? Now, a judge, I think I always trust a judge to make a sort of pithy comment on a case, and this is what Mr. Justice Glyn Jones said. He said, the case was a simple and sordid one, and it all came down to one thing, and that was the believability of the defendant's story. If he had strangled her in his sleep, it wasn't a voluntary act. They should acquit him. If there were in any doubt as to whether he was asleep at the time of the killing, then, if there was doubt, he should also be acquitted. If they thought that his story should be rejected, then they would convict him. He said this, have you ever heard of a man strangling a woman while he was asleep? Does there exist any record that such things happen? Now, I think it must have been very apparent to the jury listening to that there was no precedent, that this had never ever happened before, and certainly this defence had never been offered before, because if it had, it would have been mentioned in court, but there was no mention. He said, is it reasonably within the bounds of possibility that Boches could have moved away from his position beside the girl, moved any covering which might have been on him, removed the blanket that was covering the girl, arranged himself so that he was lying sprawled on her, and then could have extended his hands, applied pressure, and continued to apply it while she passed through the stages to death, without his having been awakened, either by his own exertions or by her struggling. And he said to the jury, use your common sense. And that was what the jury had to work on, their common sense. There was no medical evidence really one way or another to tell them what to do. The jury was out for almost 2 hours, and he was acquitted. On the following day, Boches and his wife spoke to the press, he was asked what he thought of British justice. He said, I like it very much. But he said, I was ready for a verdict either way. I'd rather resign myself to the worst. The press wanted to know if the couple were reconciled, and he said, yes, we're going to try and forget the whole unhappy affair. And Jane said, I've forgiven Bill because I love him. Now all we want to do is to get away from it all. Now, despite the remarkable nature of the case, it didn't actually result in a change in the law, although it was discussed in both the House of Commons and the House of Lords. Lots of people wrote to the newspapers. They were absolutely astonished at the verdict. And the local newspapers did actually start off a fund to pay for the funeral expenses because the family was not very well off. Boshiers and the family flew back to the United States. He left a statement with the Public Information Office. He said, I have nothing to say and want to forget the whole thing. And they stayed together. They had another child. I discovered, when I sort of went through records, that Jane, his wife, eventually died in the year 2003. And it said there that she was survived by her husband, he was obviously still alive then, 4 children, 11 grandchildren and 5 great-grandchildren, quite a substantial family. Why do I think the jury acquitted Boshiers, which we'll never know for certain, but I've got to try and think of why. And I think one factor was that they had nothing to compare it with. They could only use their own judgment. There he was, a decorated war veteran, with all his medals, a British wife, 3 small children. Were they going to condemn him on the basis of a decision, something to do with the workings of the human brain, which really, frankly, they weren't competent to even make a decision on? They didn't have any expertise in this matter. I think ultimately it came down to reasonable doubt. And the judge had made it clear that if there was reasonable doubt, then they would have to acquit him, and that's what they did. So what happened? What happened that night? First of all, there is no evidence at all that he had any intention of murdering this girl. That's quite clear. But he did say, he told the psychiatrist, and this was something that didn't come out in court, that during his wife's absence, he said he felt very lost without her and once or twice had extramarital relations. And so the once or twice that sort of worries me. I mean, you're going to know if it was once or twice, but anyway. So here he was, alone in this flat with this girl. She's naked with a blanket around her. She's already, in fact, had intercourse twice with the other young man, in front of him, which he's had to listen to. He's frustrated, you can imagine, wife having been away for some time. What's he going to do? I think he's going to try it all. That's what I think happened. And I would guess she probably rejected him. And that she probably made a noise, which was heard by the people in the flat above, and he did try to quieten her. Now, the psychiatrist also said that although he didn't believe that Boshiers had killed her while he was asleep, someone who was normally a very deep sleeper, as he was, alcohol would have more of an effect on him than it would have on an average person. And remember, he'd had very little food that day. I think he'd eaten like 1 egg in the morning, the rest of it had been beer and vodka. So he could have been confused, he might have been unable to judge how much force he was using, and unintentionally strangled her. So I think that's probably what happened. But why did he offer this really, really unlikely sounding defence? You know, I mean, there might have been other defences he could have offered, but why did he claim to have done it in his sleep? It sounds crazy. And I think that even though he probably wasn't asleep when she died, I think he offered the defence because he thought he had been. It's just my theory. He did have a history of not recalling things he'd done when he was drunk. And the medical reports actually provide us with some clues. I'm not going off on my own on this one. The prison doctor stated here that there might have been, and this is his words, an element of repression of a painful episode. The psychiatrist said that memory loss might have been due to shock. Now, we know that if someone suffers a severe shock, this can actually blank out the memory for a period of time prior to the event. So supposing, it's only a theory, supposing The shock of finding her dead had been so terrible that it had partly blanked out his memory, and it seemed to him as if he had just awoken from a sleep and was now faced with a waking nightmare. That's my theory.